What if I told you that the Pretoria Court ruling in the Edgar Lungu burial case has taken an unexpected twist, not about where or how he will be buried, but about who will pay the costs? Yes, the question of costs has exploded into the center of this legal drama. The Lungu family now faces a financial burden that could change everything about how this burial battle unfolds. But here's where it gets more dramatic. President Hakainde Hichilema's name has surfaced in reactions, with many Zambians asking if this ruling is about justice or political revenge. Stay tuned, because this cost ruling is more than just money. It could decide how Zambia remembers Edgar Lungu forever. The Pretoria Court ruling on the Edgar Lungu burial case has shocked Zambia. At the heart of the case is the question of costs, and now the Lungu family has been ordered to carry a heavy financial burden. This decision has reignited debate across Zambia. Is this justice being served, or is politics influencing courts? With President Hakainde Hichilema, HH, under the spotlight, the ruling has once again raised tensions between the government and the Lungu family. In this video, we break down the full details of the Pretoria Court ruling, the costs involved, and what this means for Zambia's political future. The body in limbo in the days after Edgar Lungu's death, Zambia was a nation suspended between grief and political uncertainty. But as the mourning deepened, an even stranger drama began to unfold, one that would not take place in Lusaka, but in the courts of Pretoria. At the center of it all was a single, haunting question. Where would the former president be laid to rest? Ordinarily, the burial of a former head of state would be a solemn, dignified affair, organized by the government, embraced by the people. But Lungu's story was different. He had died in South Africa, far from his homeland, at a time when relations between his family and President Hakainde Hichilema's administration were at their most strained. When the family resisted returning his body to Zambia, citing mistrust of the government and fears over political exploitation, the dispute escalated. Suddenly, what should have been a moment of national unity became an international standoff. Inside Zambia, rumors swirled. Was HH refusing to honor his predecessor? Was the Lungu family trying to deny the state its constitutional role? And why was South Africa now holding the body of a Zambian president in limbo? In Pretoria, the case moved quickly from whispers to legal filings. Lawyers for the family argued fiercely that the Lungus had the right to decide burial arrangements. But the Zambian state insisted that a former head of state belonged not just to his family, but to the nation. And then came the issue no one expected: costs. In legal language, costs are more than just money. They represent victory or defeat, responsibility or humiliation. To lose a case and still be ordered to pay costs can be a devastating blow, both financially and politically. For the Lungu burial saga, the question of costs carried symbolic weight. Who would be forced to pay? The family? The state? And what would that mean for how history remembered Zambia's sixth president? The body remained in limbo. The nation held its breath. And in the shadows of Pretoria's courtrooms, the struggle over burial turned into something far greater, a battle over dignity, power, and legacy. Because sometimes, death does not end a leader's influence. It only begins a new chapter. Pretoria's gavel falls. The Pretoria High Court was packed. Lawyers shuffled their papers, journalists leaned forward with their pens ready, and the air buzzed with tension. For weeks, Zambia and South Africa had been entangled in a dispute that had turned Edgar Lungu's burial into an international legal drama. Now the moment of truth had arrived. At the heart of the case was not just a body, but a question of sovereignty, dignity, and law. Could a family decide the burial of a former head of state? Or did the state itself, as the embodiment of the people, hold that right? When the judges finally entered, the room fell silent. All eyes fixed on the bench. The lead judge adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but firm as he read from the ruling. The words seemed to slice through the courtroom like a knife. The verdict was clear. The body of Edgar Lungu must return to Zambia. But the judges went further. In a move that shocked many, they turned to the issue of costs. The Lungu family, who had fought to keep control of the burial, would not be spared. Their legal battle, declared the court, came at a price, and the burden of costs would fall squarely on their shoulders. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. For the Lungus, this was more than a legal defeat. It was a public humiliation, a symbolic stripping away of power. Outside, reporters scrambled to broadcast the news. In Lusaka, HH's allies hailed the decision as a triumph of law and order. But PF loyalists seethed, calling it an act of political vengeance disguised in legal robes. For the ordinary Zambian watching from afar, the ruling felt surreal. A former president's legacy was now tied not just to politics, but to courtroom accounting. The gavel had fallen in Pretoria. The dispute was settled on paper. But in reality, it had only just begun. Because in politics, as in law, victories come with consequences, and the true cost of this ruling was yet to be revealed. The hidden battle over costs for many Zambians, the Pretoria ruling seemed straightforward. Edgar Lungu's body must be returned home. But buried inside the judgment was something far more explosive, the question of costs. At first glance, costs sound simple, a matter of who pays the lawyers and court fees. But in politics, costs are never just about money. They carry meaning. They declare who won and who lost. They can humiliate as much as they can bankrupt. For the Lungu family, being ordered to pay costs was not just a financial blow. It was a symbolic defeat. It suggested that their resistance against the Zambian state had been not only misguided, but wasteful. To many, it painted them as defiant and reckless, forcing another country's courts into a dispute they could not win. And the numbers were not small. South African legal battles are notoriously expensive. Every motion, every appearance, every delay carried a price. Whispers began to circulate. Could the Lungus even afford to pay? Or would their allies, and perhaps hidden financial backers, step in to cover the debt? In Lusaka, HH's supporters seized on the ruling. They argued that justice had not only forced the body home, but had exposed the Lungu's weakness. Even in death, Lungu drains the nation, one commentator quipped on radio. The phrase spread quickly, fueling a narrative of waste and mismanagement that had long haunted the former president's image. But for PF loyalists, the costs ruling felt like a political trap. To them, it was never about money, it was about humiliation. They accused HH of quietly celebrating the family's embarrassment, using Pretoria's courtroom as an extension of Zambian politics. And so, the battle over costs spilled beyond the legal arena. It became a question of dignity, of narrative, of legacy. Who carried the burden of this judgment? The family who fought for control? Or the nation, divided once more by a death that refused to bring closure? Because in the end, costs are never just numbers on a page. They are scars in the story of power. And for Zambia, those scars were only beginning to show. HH versus the Lungu legacy for President Hakainde Hichilema, the Pretoria Court ruling was more than just a legal victory. It was a test of leadership, of narrative, and of how he would navigate the shadow of his predecessor. From the moment Lungu died in South Africa, HH knew the burial would not be simple. Relations between the two families had long been icy, scarred by years of political rivalry. Lungu had once tried to silence him through arrests and court cases. Now, even in death, the former president seemed to challenge HH's authority. When the Pretoria judges ruled that Lungu's body must return to Zambia, HH's allies celebrated quietly. To them, the judgment validated the state's authority and undermined the family's defiance. The added sting of costs only sweetened the victory. But HH himself chose restraint. Publicly, he said little. Privately, his advisors urged him to remain measured, to avoid triumphalism. They knew that in Zambia, mourning still carried sacred weight. To be seen as gloating over Lungu's defeat, even in court, could backfire. Yet silence carried risks. Critics accused HH of hiding behind the courts, letting Pretoria do his bidding. PF loyalists claimed he was too cowardly to confront the family directly. On social media, the question spread like wildfire. Was HH honoring Lungu or humiliating him? The truth was more complicated. HH understood that the Pretoria ruling was not the end of a saga, but the beginning of a new phase. The body's return would reopen debates about state funerals, national honors, and the unfinished wounds of Zambia's past. Each decision he made, from the speeches he gave to the honors he approved, would be scrutinized as part of a larger battle over history itself. For HH, this was never just about Lungu's burial. It was about something bigger. Who would control the narrative of Zambia's recent past? Would Lungu be remembered as a fallen leader betrayed by his successor? Or as a man whose own family's defiance collapsed under the weight of law? The Pretoria ruling had given HH the upper hand. But as every leader knows, power is fragile. And in Zambia, the dead often wield as much influence as the living. PF in panic, the Pretoria ruling landed like a thunderclap inside the patriotic front. What began as a family dispute over burial had now spiraled into a political earthquake, shaking the party that once ruled Zambia with an iron grip. For PF loyalists, the court's decision was more than just bad news. It was humiliation. Not only had the family lost control over Edgar Lungu's burial, but the added punishment of legal costs painted them as weak and defeated. Overnight, the PF looked fractured, vulnerable, and cornered. In party meetings, whispers turned into arguments. Who had advised the family to take the battle to South Africa? Who would now cover the mountain of legal bills? And worse, would donors and hidden backers, already nervous about PF's future, begin to back away? Some strategists feared the ruling was part of a larger trap. If the Lungus were forced to pay, their financial strain could ripple across the PF, starving the party of resources. For a political movement already struggling to regroup after electoral defeat, the blow was devastating. Meanwhile, on the streets, PF supporters felt betrayed. Many had expected the party to rally behind the Lungu family to show strength against HH's government. Instead, all they saw was silence, confusion, and division. Anger brewed. Trust began to fracture. For HH and his allies, this was a quiet but powerful victory. The Pretoria Court had done what politics could not, weaken the PF from within. Every kwacha spent on lawyers, every headline about humiliation, deepened the sense of panic inside the party. And yet, beneath the surface, danger remained. PF had long thrived on chaos, turning victimhood into political capital. Some loyalists now argued that the ruling could be weaponized proof. They said that HH was persecuting not just Lungu, but the entire opposition. The panic was real, but so was the possibility of reinvention. Would PF collapse under the weight of this burial saga? Or would it twist the humiliation into fuel for its comeback? In Zambian politics, defeat is rarely final. Sometimes, it is the beginning of a new fight. Esther Lungu's gambit through all the noise, one figure remained curiously silent, Esther Lungu, the former First Lady. While lawyers fought in Pretoria and PF leaders scrambled in Lusaka, she stayed in the shadows, watching, listening, calculating. For many Zambians, her silence was as loud as any speech. Esther had been more than just a presidential spouse. During her husband's years in power, she quietly built networks of influence, charitable foundations, political contacts, financial ties. To underestimate her now would be a mistake. When the Pretoria Court ordered the Lungu family to pay legal costs, all eyes turned to her. Could she find the money? Would she negotiate behind closed doors? Or would she rally supporters to frame the judgment as persecution? Some insiders whispered that Esther had become the family strategist, guiding decisions while shielding her children from political fallout. Others claimed she was preparing her own moves, securing allies within PF to protect her position. What made her especially dangerous was her ability to blend vulnerability with resolve. In public, she appeared as the grieving widow, a woman unfairly burdened by politics during mourning. But in private, allies described her as sharp, deliberate, and unwilling to surrender the Lungu legacy to HH's government. Her influence was not just financial or political, it was emotional. For PF loyalists, Esther embodied dignity under attack. For critics, she represented the family's refusal to accept accountability. In both cases, she remained a central figure, whether she spoke or not. Esther's gambit was subtle but clear, to preserve her family's power by controlling the narrative. If she portrayed the Pretoria ruling as humiliation, she could rally sympathy. If she found the means to pay the costs quietly, she could project strength. Either way, her hand remained in the game. But gambits are always risky. Every move carried consequences. Too much defiance could invite further scrutiny from HH's government. Too much silence could fracture her support base. For Zambia, the question was not whether Esther Lungu would act. It was how and when, because in politics, silence is never empty. Is strategy, and Esther Lungu knew exactly how to use it. Zambia divided. When the Pretoria Court ruling was announced, Zambia did not respond with unity. Instead, it split the nation right down middle. On one side were those who believed the judgment was a victory for law and order. They argued that Edgar Lungu, no matter his legacy, belonged to the state, and that the Lungu's defiance had embarrassed the country. For them, the costs ruling was justice served, a reminder that no family, not even a former First Family, stood above the law. On the other side were the skeptics. They saw the ruling not as justice, but as politics wrapped in legal robes. To them, Pretoria's decision was proof that HH's government had quietly pulled strings, ensuring the Lungus were humiliated on the international stage. On radio call-in shows, callers accused the state of dancing on Lungu's grave before he was even buried. The debate spilled into markets, churches, and buses. In Lusaka, some vendors mocked PF supporters with jokes about legal bills instead of male meal. In the Copperbelt, PF loyalists organized small gatherings, framing the costs order as persecution of the opposition. Even in rural areas where news travels slowly, whispers spread. Was this justice or was it revenge? Social media amplified the divide. On Facebook and Twitter, hashtags emerged overnight. Hashtag Justice for Lungu clashing with hashtag Respect the Law. Memes, conspiracy theories, and fiery statements flooded timelines, turning the burial saga into a digital battleground. Religious leaders tried to calm tensions, urging Zambians to respect the dignity of death. But even their voices were pulled into the storm. Some pastors defended the family, others praised the court. The Pretoria ruling had not healed Zambia. It had exposed its fractures, old wounds between PF and UPND, between rural and urban, between those who trusted the law and those who feared it was just another political weapon. For ordinary Zambians, the question was no longer just about where Edgar Lungu would be buried. It was about something deeper, whether the country could rise above partisanship, or whether even in death, politics would continue to divide the nation. The answer, as always in Zambia, depended on who you asked. The final cost of power in the end, the Pretoria ruling, was never just about money. It was about the heavy shadow that power casts long after a leader leaves office. For Edgar Lungu's family, the order to pay legal costs was a financial wound layered upon grief. It meant selling property, calling in favors, and facing humiliation in public. But for many observers, the true price was not measured in kwacha or rand. It was measured in dignity lost. The spectacle of a former head of state's burial being fought over in foreign courts revealed something raw about Zambia. The case exposed the fragility of institutions, the weaponization of justice, and the thin line between respect for the rule of law and the hunger for political victory. For Hakainde Hichilema's government, the ruling was both a triumph and a trap. It showed the world that the state could assert its authority. Yet it also deepened suspicions that justice in Zambia is never neutral, that even in matters of death, politics dictates the script. HH's administration may have won in court, but in the hearts of many Zambians, the verdict raised uncomfortable questions about whether unity was sacrificed for power. In the diaspora, Zambians in Johannesburg, London, and New York debated what the case revealed about their homeland. Was Zambia still the beacon of democracy it once claimed to be? Or had it become just another stage where leaders cling to influence long after their time? As weeks passed, the burial dispute slowly faded from headlines. But its legacy lingered. Families whispered about it at kitchen tables, journalists wrote about it in cautious tones, and political parties sharpened it into a weapon for future elections. For the ordinary Zambian, the saga carried a lesson that power is never free. The costs are always there, sometimes hidden, sometimes public, always heavy. Lungu's burial had become more than a family tragedy. It had become a mirror, forcing Zambia to confront the price it pays when politics and dignity collide. And so the question remained, unanswered and unsettling. When the final chapter is written, what will be remembered more? The man who once ruled Zambia, or the bitter fight over his grave?